Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Customize Your Success Summit. I'm excited to bring to you all today Jason Roberts. Jason is the co-founder and CEO of Frontline Careers, a purpose-driven startup on a mission to connect frontline workers looking for more with companies that offer more. His startup evaluates the frontline environment of companies using their proprietary assessment, certifying those with awesome frontline work cultures as being frontline friendly. In addition, they offer a job site that features only frontline jobs offering outstanding benefits and perks beyond the pay. Now, Jason began and ended his corporate career in frontline operations, first as a production supervisor with Johnson & Johnson, and lastly as a general manager for waste management. And in between and all along the way, he spent several years in business consulting with Accenture. So through his work experiences and relationships, Jason realized that frontline employees wanted and deserved more from their employers. But more importantly, he also recognized that empowering and investing in frontline staff actually benefited the bottom lines of companies too. So as he likes to say, Frontline Careers is about helping businesses maximize their people and their profits. So Jason, thank you so much for sharing this time with us. Really appreciate you being here.
Glad to be here, Tina.
Yeah, so I know your experience is vast, and I love the whole part about you saw a niche and a need, and you went after it and started Frontline Careers or Frontline. So what happened though when you were younger, when you were growing up? What was the definition of success that you were taught or that you just picked up along the way?
Yeah, I think it was more modeled behavior. You model what you saw around you, and you look about, your dad, your uncles, and your aunts, and people who were role models for you. And for me, then the definition of success really became, you're working all the time. You work really hard. You do good in school. Education was really big in my family. You go to college, right? You get a degree. That's that definition of success. From there, you get a good job. You provide for your family, and you achieve some level of status, right, or some level of recognition. That is, by definition, success. But you're always working. It's almost like you're competing against this invisible people, but you always got to work harder than everybody else. That was kind of ingrained into me, and that was what success looked like. Never was it, what are you getting out of it? It wasn't necessarily what I would say kind of me-centric. It was more externally focused, so people could see how hard you're working. People could see, that status. People could see those kinds of things. And that was what the definition of success was. Obviously being a good father too, but that was the kind of the definition of success that was ingrained in me from a very early age, and up until not too far, not too long ago. That was the definition of success.
Yeah, I think a lot of us grow up that way, and it is all externally focused. But now that you have had a career in front of you, you've started your own business, you're making an impact for other people. What does success mean to you now, and how has that definition evolved for you?
I think it was a journey getting from that definition of success I just shared with you to where I'm at today, right? And there were some, major life events I think that happened, but also just you realize that you can't continue down a certain path, right? So for me, I think, success now is, first it starts with you, right? Remember I was talking about it needs to be more me-centric. So first it starts with you. So success is loving who you are, right? And I think at its core, you can't be successful if you don't love who you are, right? And I had to really realize that in terms of being at peace with myself and comfortable with where I'm at and not comparing yourself with others, right? Number one, I think that's where success starts. Two, I had to realize, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk about this later on. I can talk about the journey of getting to this point that, and a mentor of mine a long time ago, when I was trying to make a decision, he shared with me how he made decisions. He used a value system. And that was pretty early in my career. I didn't realize till much later how that would come back and be so relevant to me in terms of how I define success. So no longer was it, I think, and I've talked about this before, it was a lot less materialistic and, status driven and more aligned with values. Like, what do I value in life, right? So that is, having freedom. That is spending time with my family, making an impact. It's creating, it's building, right? Notice it's not, having X amount of money or having, this type of car or having, this type of vacation home. It wasn't those types of things when I was really forced to go back and just reassess my life and what success really meant. So I think number two, it's having alignment with your values. That is how you find success. And then three, I think is, and most important or very important for me is having purpose to what you're doing, right? And letting that drive you. That has been so relevant to me here recently as part of co-founding Frontline Careers, but enjoying having that purpose and enjoying the process of what I'm doing, right? And notice I didn't say enjoying the result of building this wildly successful company and reaching that result. It's just the process of building, right? So you got to enjoy the process. You got to enjoy the ups and downs. And when you learn to appreciate, the challenges that, like, for example, being an entrepreneur, the challenges that you face, but you learn to appreciate that and find enjoyment in it. I know it might sound a little awkward, but that is success, right? Because if you pin your success on things, right, you will find that you will not be successful and you're going to be very empty in the end.
Absolutely. And we keep chasing the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, right? Because exactly like you said, the values, how you're being, who you're being is aligned with your values and your purpose. It's not about the having and the doing, but so many of us are taught and just fall into this hamster wheel of do. And then we're like, why am I unfulfilled? Why am I burnt out? Why am I unhappy? Well, it goes back to exactly what you just shared. And I love that because you and I do a lot of this work in that way, right? You're working with frontline folks. I'm mostly working with the leadership of those frontline folks. And that trickles down to them though, right? As the leader, if the leader is constantly in the hustle and grind and the do. Well, this is one of the things I think you've seen because you've shared is like, that's what the frontline feels. And that's how they react too. And it's not actually what's in the best interest of the bottom line of the business or the people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I just love that. I love that. And could you share, like, along your journey, like, what actually is there anything pivotal that you remember that had you shift into what you're doing now? Any pivotal moments that you can remember?
Well, I think it's really three things. Now I've shared this story with other folks, my role models, like I talk about my dad, and he's the biggest role model in my life, right? And when I talk about always working hard, but I also saw at the end, okay, this is a man who worked really hard, but also took his own life. Okay. So that's something that really stuck with me. And that was in 2006. Okay. You fast forward a little bit, or a lot of it, right? And I'm doing well. I'm in corporate America. I'm moving up the ladder. But I'm not fulfilled, right? And I move into running large scale operations and I'm even more not fulfilled, right? And there was this misalignment, right? I couldn't put my finger on it, but later I realized it was a misalignment in what I valued and how I wanted, the person I wanted to become versus the track I was on progress to be. And there was this misalignment. I was creating this tension within me. And I think the third thing that hit me and made me say, you know what, Jason, now is the time you have to do something different. And that was having a stroke, right? When I had a stroke at a very early age, right, at 42 years old. So those things culminate. I've seen where if you just work, right, and move down that path, how that could end. right? I knew there was misalignment, and then I had this health scare. That was what really forced me to say, you know what, you have to do something different, Jason. And I was very fortunate, Tina. Um, I was at a, uh, I was at the Phoenix Open, and I got a chance to hear Mike Rowe speak, and he's speaking to a room full of business leaders. And he basically, the message was, you guys have got to put more emphasis on your skilled trades, less emphasis on these college degrees. These are the men and women, the people who are driving your businesses, and you're not putting enough emphasis on these roles. And that kind of mirrored what I'd seen firsthand, right? Which was also in part of the misalignment, right? Where I saw this happening, and it's not necessarily in line with my values. And that's what gave me the idea behind the company, right? So which was, why not make it easier for frontline employees to find companies or find places where they are invested in, where they do have longer term opportunity, where they are treated with dignity and respect, right? There are a lot of folks who fall into that category who are highly talented, motivated, and just want those things. And it's not hard to do. And the benefit is it benefits companies as well, right? So hearing him speak that day sparked the idea. So, but the catalyst to that, or the journey, started well before that, right? It was a culmination of things that kind of fertilized the ground. So then when I heard that idea, that really planted the seed for Frontline Careers.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that, because I think a lot of times people don't stop to really invest in, what is it that I bring to the table? What is it that I'm passionate about? What have I done along my journey that has kept calling me in a certain area and I haven't answered it?
Yeah.
Right. And then you get to that point where you're like, okay, it's enough. I hear the calling. It's getting louder. It's getting bigger. I can't ignore this anymore. And I love the fact that you took that bold step to say, we're going to create this company and we're going to make a difference for frontline workers. Yeah. We're going to make it easier for them to find the place where they fit, where they belong, where they are cared for. And that's just brilliant. So was there, along this way, now you and I are both entrepreneurs, so we know, like, we get this big idea and it's like, yeah, let's go do it. And along the way, things come up, right? It is never a straight line. I think a lot of people, when they're like, I'm going to start this business, I'm going to go from A to B. No, you're not. You're going
right.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like all the way. And it's not a linear pathway. So for you,
not at all.
No. And so, and it isn't just in corporate either. I mean, if you're just in a job, but especially if you're going into the entrepreneurial space. So for you, did you ever question yourself or second guess yourself along this journey? And if you did, what got you back on track?
I think the answer to that is, of course. And I think just a couple of things that come to mind is, before I left corporate America, right? And then once you question it, right? This is a big life-changing event, not just for you, and it's also for your family. It's going to impact a lot of people around you, right? And you invested all this time building up this career, and and it's a nice little gravy train that you have too, right? And you're about to say goodbye to that, right? So obviously you question. And then, so there's before and then even after you actually make the leap. So I'll give you a couple of examples that come to mind. So one is before, I'm thinking about those things like financial impacts. And, you got one who's in college, right? You got another one that's coming behind you, got 3 kiddos, right? So got 2 of them in college now. And you think about that, okay, the financial load and all these other kinds of things. But I remember I'd already made the decision, I'm leaving, and I'm kind of making my rounds, and I met one of my operations in Santa Maria. And as I'm talking with the folks and kind of saying my goodbyes, a woman gets up and she says in Spanish, she says, "You're the first big boss who ever talked to us," right? And I'm not saying that's indicative of the entire company or anything like that, but where I was at, and at that place and at that time, I was, right? And to hear her say those words, and they were so heartfelt, that's when I knew, you're on the right path, Jason, right? Because there are a lot more folks like that, like her, who are experiencing the same thing, right? And it's not much just to care about other people, or you see people, you walk into a facility to say, how's your day, right?
Mhm.
People notice that. And she was telling me that I noticed that you care enough to just say, how's your day? How are things going, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that she had never experienced it before reinforced with me, you're doing the right thing. This is something that's meant to be and will have an impact. Okay. But I also knew it wasn't going to be easy. Um, Entrepreneurship is often glamorized, and you don't hear, if you do your research before you dive in, you know that the vast majority fail, right? So you do your research and try to understand why people fail. Well, you don't do enough market research. You got to make sure there's a problem that you're solving, all those things. And so we felt comfortable that we had done that necessary due diligence. But then you get in to make the leap. Okay. What we didn't realize is less than 3 months later, a pandemic was shut down everything. Right. So of course, then you really start to question, right? Darn. Um, you went from record low unemployment to now record high unemployment, almost 14.5%. In like May of that year, we found it at the very end of January 2020. And you start, man, the macro environment fundamentally changed as it relates to our business. And so then you got to think, man, did we make the right decision? Right. But another example of what helped reinforce with me is, again, conversations with frontline employees who I knew, right? We started talking with a lot of frontline folks. We used that time. Some folks were let go. Some other folks were still working, but they were dealing with the brunt of COVID because it was in the work environment, right?
Right.
They couldn't work from home, right? And so I remember having one conversation with a gentleman I know, and he just shared with me, you know what, I would take a $5 an hour pay cut to work at a place that treated me with dignity and respect, right? And again, it's those conversations that help reinforce, help that kind of put that wind in your sails to say, we're we're here for a purpose, right? And we've always said we're not creating this business to make a ton of money. We are for purpose and for profit, but the purpose comes first, right? And hearing those stories and recalling the story I was telling you about before I left, those things help push you through those difficult times when you start to question, right? And you just got to, that, hey, enjoy the process, right? When you start focusing too much on the quote unquote results, now you can't just ignore results, right? You have to produce as a business, but enjoy the process of building. That's what gets you through. And of course, having those encouraging conversations that's connected to your mission and purpose as an organization. That's what helped.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as you're talking about that, something that's coming to mind for me is, and I know we'd mentioned it, you and I, when we were talking before, is like conscious capitalism, right?
Yes.
Companies that they've shown and just blown other companies out of the water over the course of a 10-year period. When you're focused on a higher purpose,
Yeah.
the results come because there's a purpose. There's a problem you're solving for people, and people feel that and they want to be a part of it. So the results are going to come. But when you're only focused on the results, the conscious capitalism companies showed that they 10x'd employee
Yeah.
engagement, revenue, everything across the board over the course of 10 years over S&P 500 companies. So, I mean, they're comparing to companies that are already doing okay.
Yeah.
But when you are focused on a higher purpose and conscious leadership and stakeholder engagement,
Yeah.
right? 10x your company. So I think you guys are just on an amazing trajectory because exactly like you said, you're maximizing people and profits at the same time. So
Yeah.
it's just so great to see that. So
Well,
one thing
I
I'd
like to
love,
say, no, I've seen it firsthand. When you don't focus on your people, you get zero discretionary effort. And it's that discretionary effort that makes the difference. So when you're talking about that outperforming the peers, it boils down to discretionary effort. People are giving more than what they have to. Why? Because they want to. because they feel like they are a part of, right? And not just a cog in the wheel, but they are actually the will and help. And they feel like we are the will that's making this thing go, and you're appreciating us for doing it. You get that discretionary effort. And to the contrary, the story I shared with you about the gentleman who's, I'll take $5 less an hour, I can tell you he was giving zero discretionary effort, right? And short-sightedness within business will say, you know what, we're going to keep our, our direct labor here, right? We're going to keep our costs down. We're not going to invest in training, all the additional maybe SG&A and all that kind of stuff that could be beneficial. It's so short-sighted. It's very short-sighted.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's countless studies. It's been done in academia so many times over that show that investment does yield longer term benefits to your bottom line than not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So good. And even, that I just came out of a 23-year government career where giving more money to somebody wasn't an option. Like it was like, here's what you got. Let's make the best of that.
True.
Right. And it's the same thing when they're engaged and they're committed to something greater than themselves because they're cared for and they know that they're part of a purpose. It's just so great. So for you, I'd love for you to share, like, what do you believe is most important for people to focus on if they want to customize their own success the way that you have?
I think first you have to, some of the greatest advice I've ever been given, Tina, was from one of my former bosses, one of the best bosses I've ever had. And he told me one time before I made the move out from Houston out to California, he said, you know what? He said, Jason, you need to understand what makes you tick. Right. And he said, because otherwise you're gonna end up killing yourself. Right. He really knew me. He knew my work ethic. He knew I just had this, again, because how it was ingrained in me in terms of what success was, always working harder, always working. And but later I would realize that those words were so poignant. They were so right on the mark. So someone looking for success, you have to be able to self-reflect and understand you and what makes you tick. Going back to how I define success now is being at peace with yourself, right? There's no pathway to success without it, right? There might be pathways to things, but you're going to find out that those things don't bring success, right? It starts with understanding you, what makes you tick, and being self-reflective, being self-critical, really understanding and going back to things like your childhood and things like that, and really exploring you. Because that's how if you understand you, now you can start to talk about what you value, right? But you can't have the latter conversation without understanding who you are in the first place, right? And what makes you tick. So for me, the advice I would give to folks is first understand yourself. And sometimes it's a very difficult journey, right? And I would recommend don't let something like a heart attack or a stroke or something else kind of hit you to make you then have to self-reflect and say, I got to do something different, okay? Take the initiative now to say, you know what? I don't like what I'm doing, okay? I don't know what I want to do, but I know that this isn't it. Let me understand me first so I can figure out the next pathway or the next step. And then once you start to understand you, and sometimes that might take, whether it's meditation or it's therapy or different tactics to help you understand you. Once you've done that, or you're starting on that journey, because it's never ending, in my view, it's never ending. Then the next thing you want to do is you start to lay out that value system, right? Truly lay it out. And I caution you. So anybody who's listening to this, who's trying to find success, I caution you that if anything you put on your values that if you can achieve it, then you might want to actually go back and say, you know what, is it really a value? Meaning this, like, can I achieve getting a certain status? You can achieve that. So what happens after that, right? So the value should be more focused on process, journey, in a way, things that frankly, you can never achieve, right? There is no end point to it. Being a good father, being a good husband, good friend, right? Like I said, making an impact. These are things that you do, right? It's just part of you. It's not something that you achieve. So once you understand who you are and what makes you tick, start to lay out your values and just be very critical of what you say, and you list out your values and make sure it's not something that you ultimately can and one day will achieve, because then it's like, what's next, right? You shouldn't be faced with that what's next question. Because if so, then maybe you might want to go back and relook at how you have ultimately defined success.
Yeah. So many mic drop moments in that one thing alone, honestly. And you and I didn't prep this conversation, right? You knew the questions I was going to ask, but I didn't know what you would say.
Yep.
And one thing I just is coming away for me, which I love, is everything that you're laying out. It's directly in line with the framework that I use with the leaders that I'm coaching, because you're exactly right. It's a scale. It's called scale framework, but it's the internal structure is the first thing, like knowing who you are, what makes you tick. What are your values? Who are you? What's your purpose? All of that is the very basic. And then having clarity of your vision for what you want to create and why, then making sure what you're doing is in alignment with that, exactly as you just said, right? And then it's, how am I showing up as a leader? Am I leading myself well and others well at the same time? So it's really from an inside out perspective. And then engagement, engaging others in this. And that's exactly what you have done. Part of what I see when you're talking about your journey, what led you to go, yeah, this is really what I want to do, is you were engaging with other people and assessing what their needs were.
Yeah.
Right. Which I just love that. It's so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your story, your journey. I know it's going to impact a lot of people that are tuning in, and just really appreciate you coming on and sharing that with everyone.
Well, thank you, Tina. I love what you're doing here. I think it's, I look forward to hearing the other speakers that you have, coming on board and sharing their stories. Because I think you'll probably hear this common theme, like we just discussed at the very beginning. Success is what you define it, but it starts with understanding you.
Absolutely. First and foremost. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jason. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.